Well, welcome to more than a year's of presentations where we're getting along and getting people interested in keeping them talking to each other. And we have a very good presentation scheduled right now to try and figure out how to reimagine the purpose of an economy by Dr. Yannick Beaudoin. He is involved with a number of different things, and I'm going to turn it over to his friend Julia Kim. And most of you will have seen her last week do a wonderful presentation for us. Julia, why don't you introduce Yannick for us?
Thanks so much, Ted, and welcome everyone. When Yannick and I were chatting about this, we thought of it as a kind of a double feature or a double hit through, I guess, baseball terms. But really, there's a sense of passing on the baton because the topics are very much related. When I spoke about Bhutan and GNH last week, it was very much with the idea that this is something of real unique relevance to Canada and to other parts of the world, particularly at this time. And Yannick and David Suzuki Foundation are really in an exciting position to try to bring this kind of thinking forward. And I think this audience with the Canadian Association of the Club of Rome are really the kinds of ears and minds and hearts that might help give some vision and momentum to this, what Yannick will be sharing. Yannick is a personal friend. I met Yannick actually in Bhutan. He came to one of the Gross National Happiness Center's programs in early years. And if you look carefully, you might find a photo of Yannick in a go, the traditional Bhutanese beautiful clothing that men wear. And he's the Director General for the Ontario and Northern Canada at David Suzuki Foundation. There's the photo in front of Tiger's Nest on Yannick's spot there. He's the Director General for Ontario and Northern Canada at David Suzuki Foundation. He has close ties also with Schumacher College, where he did the Masters in Economics for Transition. Interesting background. He's also got a lot of research experience and practical experience in marine geology, and he was a former chief scientist at GRID-Arendal in Norway, which is a UNEP collaborating center. So bringing a real depth of experience, as well as his current work at David Suzuki Foundation, and really looking forward to what Yannick has to share. And I would really encourage folks to lean in and listen with the idea of what does this mean for me and for us as those living in Canada, those listening in from Canada and the US, and what could we be implementing here at this time. So over to you, Yannick. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to remember all our good times in Bhutan, and we're a big part of my own personal journey in this space of new economic thinking really kind of started and really got accelerated. So thank you, Julia, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, CACOR, for inviting me to have this chat with you all. First step first is obviously sharing screen. Let's see if that all works out. We tested it before. And here we go. Everybody, thumbs up from Ted if you see my screen now. Yeah, all good?
Yes, you're just fine.
Perfect. So I am joining you today from the traditional territories of many First Nations in the Southern Ontario region who came together to create the Dish with One Spoon territory, basically about coming together and sharing and respect and commonality, which in many ways that really lies at the core of what we're trying to look at when we're thinking about reimagining economic purpose. So what I thought I would do today, I didn't think I would need to spend a lot of time literally talking about economics with this group. So I think what instead I wanted to put together is a bit of the origin story of this nascent Wellbeing Economies Alliance for Canada and Sovereign Indigenous Nations hub, and sort of looking at how we kind of came through this space of working, listening, discussing over the last couple of years, having town halls. So I put together kind of a presentation based on those conversations, on the noticings, on the insights, on some very interesting comments and feedback over the last 2 years that have really helped to shape how not just the David Suzuki Foundation, but really how this We All Can might come together in that sense of looking at deeper into the paradigm and really enabling kind of more profound, I call it the slow lane of change, right? There's all these things we have to do today to fight the current system in the fast lane, but this is that slower kind of pace. But just, yeah, a little bit to get to say, it's always interesting to sort of see, well, who am I talking to? And I had the great introductions here of from Julia about where a bit of my origin story lies and my previous professions. But maybe I kickstarted by saying, if any of you love Brussels sprouts, we might not get along. I mean, if I had a time machine, I only had one time travel back in time, it would be to go remove Brussels sprouts from the gene pool. But if you love peanut butter, we're really going to get along. But I do have a transdisciplinary background, both in the geological sciences and earth sciences. I spent a lot of years in industry, and then also deep in the oceans. I fell in love with the oceans when I was a kid, swallowing pennies next to the beaches in Prince Edward Island. And then went back a few years ago, halfway through my UN career, when I couldn't quite understand international development and what was wrong with it and what was going on. And then so I decided to go and do an economics degree, and I was like, okay. So that's just a little bit about me. So yeah, so when we start down this process, and again, this is me relaying to you the different conversations with Canadians, again, coast to coast to coast, just going over the last couple of years. And also some of the conversations I've had in the past in the UN, where folks come to you and say, oh no, we can't change this because we don't have enough data, we don't have enough science, we don't have enough knowledge, we need more science, more data, more knowledge. And it's like, I kind of look back and say, we're the 21st century now, 2021, there is no technological reason, scientific reason, or gap in knowledge for us to be doing what we're doing, both to each other and the planet. So I think that there's always that gentle ability to find a way to push back and sort of say, do we really need more data on this issue? Or is there something else that we need when it comes to changing our behaviors or changing a certain pattern or a certain way of making decisions? Politicians love to use that excuse, right? Oh, we'll commission a committee and get some more data and more reports. But we don't. We have the ability not to produce our electricity with carbon. We have our ability not to over-consume, overfish, over everything. But we choose, therefore, in our systems, or our systems kind of promote this approach of the overconsumption, overdoing, over everything. Even in the economics field, it's been fascinating to sort of say, we need to do more economics research. Well, there's hundreds and hundreds of schools of thought in economics that already exist. So again, it's not a lack of knowing something. It's not a lack of knowledge. So there's something else. What is that something else that's lacking? And that's sort of what comes down to a bit of the point with the We All Can, is not necessarily we're not going to go out and do more reports and do more science and do more knowledge generation. They're really more is about maybe wisdom creation. And part of that is understanding and acknowledging that there are so many different ways to sense and inquire into the world that are conveniently ignored consistently. And why is that? And how do we elevate and surface these different ways of knowing from Eastern traditions, indigenous traditions, even in Western tradition itself, there are different ways of knowing that are conveniently put aside and ignored. So the starting point is for me, and let's say in kind of my kind of input into the We All Can, is we don't need to know anymore, we need to do something, and that's a very different space. So why are we stuck then, in a way? Why are we ignoring a lot of this knowledge and wisdom that does exist today? Why do we ignore all these different ways of knowing? Well, we are kind of stuck in a worldview that does think it's always right. And I'm not here to attack a worldview versus another. It's an acknowledgement, again, through our conversations, that we have a deep-seated set of beliefs and values, and they are primarily shaped by one worldview. And we can have probably many sessions on arguing and discussing the cognitive history of that worldview, but that's where we are today. We are really stuck in this space where these embedded ways are there, and this is the only way you can do this is that, the only way you can do that is this, and the only thing that'll get us from A to B is this and that. So these very dogmatic kind of views. And when you think about it, this all came to be, I use an analogy of a painter, right? So you have a nice, beautiful canvas. And when you allow only one painter to paint, you're always going to get a limited, finite amount of imagination. And certainly based on that one painter's lived experience, context, belief and values, et cetera. So whether it's economics or contemporary democracy, legal systems, all of these are painted by one painter. And the other thing that's always important to remind people of, especially in my presentation, the only thing in these kinds of efforts or discussions that we have that is non-negotiable, that was not invented by people, is the planet. Everything else was invented. So it's always only limited by the limits of our imagination. So in this case, so far, one culture, actually technically half of one culture, got to imagine. And this is what we have. Norms, dogma, holy economic scripture, all based on that 2,000 years of cognitive history. And again, I am not attacking it. I'm not there to bring it down. It's simply a reality check to sort of say, this is the starting point that we have today. And then we institutionalized all of this when it comes down to, again, just bringing it back to economics and the modern economic model. We institutionalized it. And as you know, Professor Stiglitz has often said, you know, it's no longer really a science, probably never was a science, and it is a religion. And changing belief systems and enabling a shift in religious thinking is not a technical discourse. You know, you can't really walk into someone's church, tell them their religion is wrong and expect to walk out in one piece. And so it is much deeper kind of social process, social thinking, invitational and gentle in a way, if you're going to start to move those norms and kind of have those gentle changes in value propositions that form the basis of a belief system. So again, these all came through these different conversations and interactions, and I have, you know, early on in my days at DSF, you know, again, testing out where we might go and how we might do our work in this space of transforming an economic paradigm. I did test it. I did walk into some meeting saying, well, I got the solution for you. You're wrong. I'm right. Hey, what do you think? It wasn't pretty. And so that was a quick learning that you're not going to get very far if you do it that way. But what did that 2,000 years of half of one culture's, when I say half, of course, we can all recognize it was all men. So half of one culture's cognitive history gave us. So we have this algorithm, right, in the economics world. This hardcore, really wired, programmed belief. No one knows where it really comes from. Very few people in Canada understand the basic functioning of the economic model. So the algorithm that defines our society today is the road runner. How quickly can you convert a resource to money using the cheapest possible labor? So in the blank spaces of that algorithm, you can see where poverty comes from. You can see where inequality and injustice comes from. If you treat the natural world as a resource, you can see where over extraction comes from, because none of it exists in the actual algorithm, only in the blank spaces in between the algorithm. And once again, none of this is natural law, right? It's all invented, it's all created, it's all imagined by people. And so we then went into the process in a way of going out to people and helping surface a little bit some of these moments, some of these assumptions, some of these wired beliefs, just kind of gently put them out there and see how people would react, right? Once they start to know, once they start to see, once they Google for themselves or Wikipedia something, what were those reactions and what were those insights? So these are some of the lessons in a way of the early days of not just the We All Can, but even when I worked in the UN on the Sustainable Development Goals before they were called the Sustainable Development Goals. We basically lost every battle when we came to trying to get SDG 8 on economic growth, not to have the word growth, like maybe change it for progress. Didn't work. But a lot of those lessons were also similar there, where very few people know where all this comes from. We just have faith in it. And so, we did a lot of different, this is one of the design labs. We had an early lab last fall. We brought all backgrounds of Canadians from coast to coast to coast again, just in a space of kind of really doing a thought exercise, a deeper thought exercise, not technical. We weren't teaching about economics. We were really talking about the lived experience, what people were feeling and getting from living the phenomenon that is the economic model. and sort of digging into those spaces about, well, what are the things we know? What are the things we don't know? And what are the things we just believe, but we don't know why we believe? And so some of that came through looking at historical moments, very finite, specific moments in time that led to powerful, powerful transformations. And when people started to uncover a little bit the blanket to look underneath, and so really, that's all it was? It was really impressive to see some of the reactions. So we started off usually in the 20th century, not to go too far back, but people often ask us, or ask me, well, you can't just change an economic system. It's like, okay, well, let's show you how often we did it in the 20th century. So of course, between, you can start before the First World War, but we were between the two. And we said, well, there was a Great Depression. And then folks had to come together, and the president said, give me a solution. We got to get out of this Great Depression. It's getting too great. And so convened some academics, and they came up with a solution, right? The New Deal. So there you go, economic systems transformation. But then, of course, another war breaks out. Okay, back to communism, so we can make as many tanks as we can. That's a second economic systems transformation. So on and on. And we would just bring them through a bit of those historical moments, not judging them, not saying good or bad, or wrong or right. Just here are these moments in time where profound economic systems transformation actually occurred, and how few people were involved in pushing that along. And every now and then, of course, we'd get into the group photos, different economists, different conferences, Bretton Woods, San Francisco, Montpellier. And I always have this moment in my presentations for Betty White. So if you all know from Golden Girls, Betty White, but in one of the town halls north of Toronto in Richmond Hill, which is not exactly David Suzuki Foundation community per se, we had about 400 people in that town hall. And I was showing these different moments. It was a historical journey through the modern economic system, where it came from and all that. And we got to these group photos of the two main conferences after World War II. And there was this wonderful lady in the front row. She was just like looking at me, and she was getting angrier every time we would show these pictures. And I thought she was just going to say, "You're wrong, and capitalism or something." And at some point, she stood up and took her glasses off in the middle of the room, and she said, "They're all men, #MeToo." And I think that's a profound moment of noticing, right? Where when you're faced with the reality of that one painter painting the picture, and you're not the painter, and you're not even visibly resembling the painter, you have a visceral reaction. You wonder, why is it that a small group of people, and in this case, a small group of men, Western men, got to rewrite the systems of the world? And that's all it took, right? 3 weeks. No internet, no smartphones, no Google, no Siri, and then we institutionalize a whole global economic model. And not to say that anything was, again, wrong or bad. Their intent was, let's not have another war. And pretty much we haven't had another global war, but everything beyond that intent was unintended. And now we have the consequences we have today. And also a system, again, based on that one world view, where so many particular approaches to existence, to living, are normalized, right? Classism, caste systems, looking at extraction is a normal thing, over extraction, commoditization, all these things are normal and have been normal over 2,000 years in that history. So, it's always interesting to sort of see as well how once people start to notice, that's all it took. Or these reactions to these small moments of profound change, that's when you start to get, people really get visceral about it, like going, "Are you kidding me? Like, that's crazy." Or, "Hey man, all of us in this room of 400 people in Richmond Hill, north of Toronto, we can do way better." And that's what you want, right? In the essence of trying to help nurture a change, a paradigm changing moment. It's not bombarding people with data and science that'll get them there. It's instilling and catalyzing their own questioning and their own realization that, well, if a few people can do that, a whole bunch of us could do way better. And that's when you start to get into moving from having faith in a system with unknown origins and unknown knowledge to, I want to know more about the system, and I want to question that particular faith. And then you start to get into some really interesting spaces. One of the you know, a part of this process is also making sure we're using humor and storytelling. I always like to take a little water break at this point in the presentation and show, you know, and see what your reactions are to a little video on trickle-down economics, which is always a big hit in a lot of the population, because the general public, again, has heard these terms. Trickle-down economics is the best thing since sliced bread. And then they find out what it is and they go, wait a minute, no, that's just wrong. So here's one of the videos that gets the most reaction and conversation in a lot of the town halls and presentations that I've done.
Hello, I'm from the Australian government. Are you confused about the economy? Unsure how it all works? Great. Just making sure, because there's no way we could have one of the fastest growing inequality rates in the world if you understood trickle-down economics. Trickle-down economics is when we let the rich piss on you and we tell you it's raining. Like when we let billion-dollar companies and millionaires pay no tax and then tell you there isn't enough cash in the budget for this stuff. It's all part of our SFA tax policy. Qantas paid SFA taxes for the past decade. That's the spirit of Australia. Meanwhile, wage growth is dead and millions live below the poverty line. On New Start, the unemployment benefit, which even the Business Council says is inadequate, yet we've consistently refused to raise. Why should we? Julia says she can live on $40 a day, and she'd know. She only owns 5 houses. But don't worry, ScoMo has a brand new solution. Bigger tax cuts for the biggest tax dodgers, like the banks, which are currently being exposed as massive corrupt by a royal commission. But hey, everyone makes mistakes and they deserve a fair go too. But if you're on Centrelink, we'll hunt you down with debt collectors, even if you owe us nothing. Because as News Corp tells us, it's people on welfare who are bleeding the taxpayer. P.S. News Corp pays SFA taxes too. Relax, banks and CEOs will find a way to trickle some of that wealth down to you. They haven't been able to name a single country where this has ever happened before, but hey, we place full trust in them at a time when we also fully support a royal commission into their corruption. Think that's a contradiction? Nope, that's trickle-down economics. The best part about trickle-down economics is that the system isn't broken, it's not illegal, it's working just as intended, trickling the wealth from you to the rich and telling you it's for your own good. Trick economics, when the wealth trickles all right, just not in your direction. Authorised by the Department for Distributing Breadcrumbs to the Proles.
So you can imagine a room full of, you know, a diversity of Canadians looking at a video about trickle-down economics that has no data, no graphs, no economists speaking, but really telling the truth of that system and then the reactions to it. And I think a lot of the inspiration we get in how we design our workspaces and maybe the future of this We All Can hub is really based on that, right? If you're able to convey the reality of something without necessarily going down the deep rabbit holes of supply demand curves and data and macroeconomics, you really get into the hardcore of the lived experience that people feel, and then realizing, wait a minute, like we didn't invent that, somebody else did, and it doesn't apply to my life. I want something different. And this really gets into that space of purpose. What is the purpose of an economy for? So yeah, so I love that video, because, well, David Suzuki Foundation is a nonpartisan organization, so we can't use any Canadian political videos. So we borrowed from the Australian government, and then it's always a bit of fun. It's also interesting to note in our conversations when you start to go down the path of also realizing these this degenerative economic model, this worldview where extraction and over-extraction are rewarded, where subjugation, oppression, colonialism is rewarded, is very, very new. It is the new kid on the block. It is not, from a historical perspective in a global sense, the norm, so still pretty new. And this is not to go and point to indigenous tradition or Eastern traditions and say, here, let's romanticize them because they're all perfect. That's not the case. You're not trying to romanticize something, but what we are able to show, at least from a natural world relationship. So as a human economy exists within a natural world, where were those economies before, let's say in the case of Turtle Island, before colonialism? How were they? What was the philosophy and the ethos? And it's so drastically different than Western economic thinking. that we, to this day, if you're trained primarily in Western worldview, have a very, very, very difficult time connecting with the possibilities that are represented by indigenous economic models before colonialism. And we don't have the words for it. The English language is very limited in its ability to talk relationship, to give agency to things that we consider objects. So there's a lot of barriers there still to this day to sort of say, oh yes, we want to bring in Eastern wisdom and indigenous wisdom. That's great, everybody wants to do it, and yet it doesn't happen. And that is that disconnection, that inability to kind of slow down and say, what was it like for 10,000 years of living sustainably with the natural world, and only the last 400 being so destructive? So that's still a big part of the process as well, is how do you help realize that a new economic model isn't actually new. It's based on beliefs and values that have existed since time immemorial, and also in Western culture. Remember the Celts, the Druids, a lot of different traditions in Western indigenosity as well, but still very, very difficult for Western scientific thinking to comprehend. So, all right, where are we going from here? You know, as we all can. So there was a choice in a way. Do you go down the technical pathway? Do we hire, bring a lot of economists together, put up some policy models, advocate for certain rules and laws, and bring out the science and the Excel spreadsheets and all that, which is one way? Or do we go down more the human way of trying to find relationship, trying to imagine together, trying to actually be subjective, trying to embrace a variety of lived experiences, cultural backgrounds. And so we've chosen to go down that path, in the sense that the David Suzuki Foundation is not going to be the one with the solution. We're really there to create the spaces to help evolve what it might be if we all imagine together what things might look like. What is economics if we were really thinking about stewarding the world around us, as the original term of oikos was. And so that is a very different approach than, again, bombarding people with data and science alone. Not to say that data and science are not important, it's just when it's done alone, it's out of a context. So how do you move also then into the space of the more holistic beings that we are, the highly emotional, irrational? I love how modern economics and the rational invisible hand, no such thing as a rational human. And so that's sort of the path that we're trying to find, that balance between the two, where we're able to kind of take the best of both worlds, if you want to say, and create spaces where imagination can really take over. I always loved this particular piece. I never know exactly if it's true that Albert Einstein said all these things, but he said a lot of really good things. So let's just say that this one is correct, and it was him. But it is about the servant, right? The servant and the lead, and how we now have a society that really caters to the brain and Western worldview rather than the heart or the intuition. How do we rebalance that? And it's not necessarily to go down a space where people are not ready for. If I work with the 5 big banks here in Toronto, I'm probably not going to go down the inner journey with them so far, but it is trying to connect a little bit to the fact that the average corporate CEO also has a heart, also has emotions, and also has intuitions. And when you all bring them together, you do see a light shine suddenly in the eyes and go, okay, so how do we move forward together from here? So, in the end, it's always good to remind folks it only takes 3 weeks and a few hundred men to change the world profoundly in the economic sense. And of course, economics is all about relationship and value. And if you don't get that right, then you really have a bigger can of worms over time that now we're having to recover from. But that's all it takes. Just bring them to a hotel for a while. So what if you did same thing? Give me 3 weeks. We all can 3 weeks. Bring thousands of people together. With the internet that we have today, we actually can do that. If everyone's painting on that canvas, what would we come up with? Would it really be the same thing? Unlikely. And so as change actors, we can suffer from the same challenges that are the core of Western worldview, right? There's a lot in the change world that is very filled with hubris. And how do you recognize that? How do you point and say, I might have an opinion as Yannick Beaudoin, but I do not have the solution. So I have something to contribute. I have something to put into a space. I have something to add to yours, to yours, to yours. But that is the challenge. We're kind of taught a lot of the opposite, right? Get out there, change the world. Tomorrow, you can do it. They're wrong, you're right. How do we also then embrace that humility? And I believe, yeah, you know, this is all about co-creating together new stories, changing the myths, the legends that underpin current economic thinking, and really start from the point of view of purpose. You know, the first question I ever asked when I joined David Suzuki Foundation and did a small little workshop, I asked the folks, and I had a big whiteboard with nothing on it. And I said, I'll write whatever you say. What's the purpose of the Canadian economy today? And there were no answers. A lot of thinking, but no answers. And then when I said, what would you like it to be? Then the answers started to flow. So already a very interesting piece around the disconnect between purpose. So there you go. Thank you very much. So open for questions and debate. Everyone is still here. I don't hear anybody.
No, well, part of that is my logistical issue of trying to get my mic back on. Yannick, that was wonderful. And I know it has generated a lot of different questions. As the moderator, I get first dibs. And it just raised as you're coming through. I mean, I have difficulty disagreeing with you, so I'm going to have to try. I think that was great. I mean, we are seeking new ideas, and we're seeking ways to make them happen. It occurs to me, though, you said, you know, why, you know, are there limits to knowledge? If we are trying to seek new ideas and new concepts and new approaches, and yet we don't even use our own. You know, that trying to get wisdom from our own culture, much less integrating ones from others, has seemed to be a real challenge for the people who try to take decisions. And I'd like to ask you first to give me a few ideas about, are there answers that would actually allow us to change the way in which decisions are really made? Because both you and I and most of the other people here are seriously interested in making that happen.
So I guess, I mean, one way to get into that question is more maybe, again, noticing, especially during COVID, some of the questions that have been posed to us at the foundation from government. I would never have thought 3 years ago that the finance ministry of Canada would come to us and say, why do you think we had to pause the economy in order to deliver health well-being during a health crisis to Canadians? And I was just like, that's usually the question we'd be asking you. And so to me, there seemed, because we're in the middle of a health crisis, and please do not think that I'm using COVID and opportunity as a positive thing. You know, again, just a terminology, but it has catalyzed some very interesting thinking and re-questioning, starting to be what I think are the right questions, certainly in Canada. We've seen it elsewhere, right? I think you've all heard of the New Zealand well-being budget, you know, and again, this doesn't just start because of, you know, bureaucracy. It starts because a leader stood up and said, there's something wrong. I mean, if the only reason New Zealand has an economy is boosting GDP forever, there's a problem. We have all these New Zealanders suffering all kinds of issues. And so suddenly there's a questioning of what the purpose of a national budget is. So I think we're seeing in the let's call it the financially dominant countries, G20, a questioning of relevance, of purpose. Europe is already having discussions around renegotiating the social contract. So I think that's where those spaces are, and how can we help, you know, as we notice the cracks in the wall, how do we help put a little, what do they call them? I have my French words now, but the little, when you lift your car to change your tire, right? The little cranks in that wall, and make those cracks bigger and let the light in. And I think that's what we're starting to see, I feel, mainly because of failures. There's so many systemic failures that even leaders now can no longer ignore that what part of the system is leading to those failures.
Thank you, Yannick. Now, I have a number of people who have listed questions, and I'd like the rest of you, if you have questions, to put them into the chat. Art is going to be next, followed by David Doherty, and after that, I'm working my way down the list, and then Frederick Amour. So, Art, you're on next.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that struck me during your presentation, you never mentioned population and the massive problem we have with population containment. And I think that is an issue that is just overwhelming the economy. I mean, it is so huge that fiddling around with different economic models probably isn't going to change much, because the population is growing, the demands are forever there, no matter what the economic model. How do you see these, a new economic paradigm actually addressing population?
Yeah, so I look at it from the feedback loop perspective, right? I don't have a lot of experience looking at the population angle, but in the contemporary economic system, which is based on a particular type of growth, to have that growth sustained or growing over time, you need population growth. To sustain the population growth, you need the economic growth. And so you create a positive feedback loop. If you break one side of that equation, then you have an automatic impact on the other side. Because the discussion around population becomes fraught, right, with ethics and debate and who gets to decide. And as an economist, I much prefer and feel safer going into breaking the other side of the cycle. You don't need actual economic growth to have a healthy society. That is a myth, that is an assumption, and is very particular, self-serving to a small percentage of the population. So if you look at the Japanese experiment, which is an unintentional experiment, very stable population, zero economic growth, all the social indicators have kept going up for 10 years, despite their attempt to keep growing the economy. You do have examples, again, unintended, where you've stabilized basically the population side of the equation by breaking the myth that you need to physically grow an economy. So I agree that there may be a lot of other issues. A lot of folks work on the population side and then try to, even countries try to experiment. We all know from Asia. I don't feel comfortable in that space. I think there's a lot that because the West has done so much at growing financially, its economic power and might, and that has actually exacerbated issues in other parts of the world, that it is a much more complex and complicated equation to try to resolve. So rather, resolve the other part of the growth equation. Eliminate this idea that you need infinite material growth to have a thriving society.
Next question is going to feed right off this one. It is whether or not there is, in fact, a practical and rational, stable system. Dave, you are going to focus on sustainability, if it exists.
Well, I was really interested by the video about trickle-down economics. My question, it comes in two parts, but they're really not different. Do we really know what sustainable development, quote unquote, is? Or is it a diffuse label similar to trickle-down economics that is not good for ecosystems or societies? Are we fooling ourselves into thinking that we can continue with economic growth and the accumulation of wealth in fewer and fewer hands?
Yeah, and again, I can only share my opinions. So I did work a lot on the development of the SDGs, supporting member states in particular during the process of writing them. And as soon as SDG 8, inclusive economic growth, came out, that it was clear, at least for me, in my opinion, that we cannot achieve sustainability in that sense. And I mean more in particular the ecological sustainability, planetary boundaries in this case. So try to separate for a moment the social. The sustainable development goals are from the same paradigm, right? They're the same paradigm that extraction converted to wealth, and then you can buy your way to a better life and sustainability. That paradigm is not changed. And so why would we expect a different outcome? I think Einstein once said that was the definition of insanity. So the MDGs to the SDGs, the only thing that changed was M to S. We didn't achieve the MDGs. So I think as long as we're still looping and trying to have our cake and eat it too, which is predominantly, again, Western economic thinking. You can have your cake and eat it, and then you'll have another cake and a new cake. BC's burning, Siberia's burning. There's no more fish in the sea. I don't know what else it'll take, right? I mean, so even if you're a very data-oriented person, all the trends are clear, but the trends get clearer and clearer, and we still don't change our approach to sustainability. And that's a relationship piece, right? We still think it's a quantitative equation, when in fact, sustainability, thriving is a very qualitative piece. What makes you thrive? What do you feel? Do you need to buy the next iPhone every 6 months? Do you need fast? No, there's no need, but we've converted want into need, and then we're still in that same paradigm. It is the challenge. I mean, I worked in the climate change world in the UN for so long. When you're at COP 26, now 27, it's not going to change because we're in the same paradigm. Job security, people have done careers out of the COPs.
Yeah, unless we can pull together something like the Bretton Woods meeting and really drastically change things. If I might make one quick comment related to the previous question, this morning I was hearing on the CBC radio program, green, whatever it is, that in the last decade, it's been recognized, especially at the UN, that increasing personal consumption is now a greater driver of ecosystem damage than is population growth.
Well,
the intensity of consumption, for sure.
People have been fooling themselves all along. Even when we were trying to write Brundtland, the term sustainable development was sold as differently to two people. The environmentalists were there for the sustainability part, and the others were there for development, and they very seldom talked to each other, and they had different metrics. And that has really dogged this debate for a very long time.
Well, it's also extremely hard to pin down. I have a copy of the book, and I once went through it, and I think I found 87 different definitions of sustainable development.
Thank you. That adds. Frederick, I think you're next. Frederick, are you there? Okay, I will move on to Mike Nickerson. Frederick, if you're there, please turn your mic on and you can come in next.
Okay, I'm not so much a question, just that, I've looked at the possibilities and imagined and read about how we might make society, transform from the fossil fuel system to a renewable energy system. And there's just so much mechanical materialist involvement that even if we could replace the energy with renewable energy, we would still be threatening species, we'd be still threatening cultures, we'd still be having income inequality, that it takes a shift in the value structure. And I think that's what was introduced here. We've been using the line, more fun, less stuff. Fun being anything that you do with your life, which can be learning and appreciating and relating and music, dance, sport, all of that stuff, which was culture before the consumer age, before the industrial process started to produce so much stuff that we had to learn to consume all that stuff. People would find ways of making their life satisfying, relating and doing in their culture. And if we can reclaim that in some way, we have such sophistication for providing basic food and shelter and doing that in a way that, doesn't degenerate, that it is possible, but, the enormous, you can't get growth off of the list, right? I was involved in policy making with the Green Party, and people would go out and they'd write stuff and they were saying, and we'll make, the economy grow. I said, no, that's not what it's about. We're big enough. Like, how do you get a civilization that's been growing for 10,000 years to realize it's grown up now? Getting bigger is not what we need to do.
Yep, growing up is exactly right. And there's a beautiful opportunity to take back the word growth, right? I love growth. I absolutely am pro-growth, but the growth I'm pro for is qualitative, right? And so my friend Kate Rayworth will often say she's growth agnostic. So there you go, same thing. So when I'm asked by a minister, well, yeah, but you can't do this without growth. I'm like, absolutely right. But what are you trying to grow? And then you start to see that chunks of cerebral energy, because you're so taught the growth. You have faith in one definition of growth, and you don't realize there's so many other definitions that are better. No.
Yeah, no, and how to put those into packages that can go out to the population, because of course we're brainwashed with the economic expansion thing all the time, and huge amounts of wealth available to do that promotion.
I have next Bill Tyson and then Anita Thorhook. Bill, are you there?
Yeah, hi, back to population. I think really we've got to come back to that. It's the only way we're going to get out of the mess we're in now is by decreasing the number of people we have on this planet. We're tinkering around with changing light bulbs and stuff, but it's hopeless to ever get the ecology back where it should be unless we reduce our numbers by at least 50%. How we do that is a question.
We got any general reactions on how that might happen?
Well, we grew our population with boundless, useless energy, right? Once we found the fossil fuels in Africa. So you can basically, again, like I said, the other side of the equation, if you remove the growth imperative, physical material growth imperative of the economy to convert to financial capital, you remove that assumption, that myth, that falsehood, and you change it for the qualitative growth, you will start to see a natural tendency to find a new balance. Do you need 8 billion human beings alive on a Tuesday? No need. But our system promotes that because it needs it for its own. So again, for me, tackle that myth, and then over time, you will start to see stabilization as it should be. We haven't been, humanity's been what, less than 1 billion for pretty much all its existence. Very, very recent. And then you see where's that coming from? Well, if you need cheap labor, you don't have people in that equation. Remember that algorithm, it's cheap labor. There's no human beings in that equation. Then that was one way you needed more cheap labor, more cheap labor, more cheap labor in order to convert more resources to money. You create the positive feedback loop. So that's where I see, again, the opportunity to change that result on the ground is to move ourselves away from this idea that economic success is materialism only.
Anita, I think you're next on the list.
All right, thank you, Ted. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Yes, good. So I think things would be very different if instead of having growth and economic progress in the center, we had well-being of ecosystems and people. And I would like to begin the assumptions in your mind by saying plants came before animals, and they provided the oxygen that makes our atmosphere so that we animals, along with all the others, can breathe. Otherwise, we would have had nothing to breathe. And at the same time that that's our reality of the planet we live on, we have ruined 85% of our terrestrial ecosystems and 50% of our ecosystems in the oceans. Therefore, we have far less oxygen to breathe, and we have far more carbon dioxide between the fossil fuels burning and the other extractive activities. What if we harnessed people in regenerative culture where we brought back at least a portion of some of the wonderful ecosystems that are throughout the world that have been so degraded, and we use labor, which would be partly unskilled labor of anybody in any country, and some technical labor, and had various UN and other agencies running different parts, country by country, because each one has lots of degradation. And we thought about having better qualitative education for those who have been abused, along with the decimation of our total underlying security of the ecosystems. And wouldn't that be a different fix on the problem than just some spin-off of the potential economic growth or sustainability?
Yes, I 100% agree. And like I said in the beginning, all of those things are happening. They're just not changing the norm of that macro push. And so it's all about, like, how do you turn these smaller scale restoration, regenerative economy practices, regenerative agriculture? There's a lot of this happening. It's been happening for decades, but it hasn't shifted those societal level macro norms. And that's that piece, that bridge we don't understand well, the addiction to power, the dynamics created by money. That's where that last piece in the equation has to be pushed into. And how do you do that in a way that's not attacking all the time, but really inviting in to sort of say, are you really thinking this is the way to do it? Like just trade on the markets every day and that's it? Is that your life? If not, how do we work together to kind of transform, bring up these systems that are much more beneficial, whether it's mental health, environmental health? You know, we're looking to make things thrive and be healthy. I agree. Again, there's no new knowledge needed. It's been there, it's available. It's just not cracking that last barrier that's a deep-seated fear. Right? You'll have a lot of politicians that are afraid of the unknown. You have a lot of corporate leaders that are afraid of the unknown. If we're not doing this way, well, we don't know what happens if we do the other way. So we'll do the familiar. Society at large has a very hard time, right? We have our day-to-day needs and we still feel that this is the only way to get to those needs and we're still addicted to the same system. Hell, we're a charity. We depend on capitalistic wealth, right? So we have a challenge there as well. So I agree with you, Anitra. I mean, exactly what you need is moving into regenerative and restorative. And that last piece is how do you change the human programming in Western culture that is still afraid of moving into a different direction?
Well, it has to be done on a broad people basis. It clearly is not going to be done at the top, or else they would have done it already. So obviously, we, the people, have to rise up as they did in the revolutions against the kings in Europe and the revolutions post World War II in Africa and Asia. And we just have to begin regenerating instead of consuming and populating.
Yeah, there have been a number of leaders who have at least visibly tried to buy into a rather broader set of values in terms of environmental restoration and so forth. I'm thinking ranging from Bloomberg to Mark Carney to, we go down this long list, people who for many of us was surprised when they came around. Is this a significant symbol or is it just greenwashing?
Well, so I guess we always want, now that we're in a climate crisis, we're in a biodiversity crisis, there's still this assumption that as we're in a crisis, things can change and must change fast. The challenge is when you're looking at a paradigm, Danilo Meadows, Joanna Macy's work, all those paradigms don't shift any quicker because there's a crisis. Paradigms are based on deep-seated beliefs, body of culture over time. We embody basically our beliefs over time. We pass them generationally, and you're still having to shift those values and beliefs. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a bit of our challenge in the change enabling world is we still have to fight today, all the fights, right, against any little win we can have to push back a bit of climate change as much as we can, injustice, inequality, and poverty within the current system. We have no choice. We have to be out there. Greta Thunbergs have to be out there. The youth have to be out there. What does it take for them in the future never to have to be out there again? What will it take to not have a DSF in the future, to not need a UN in the future for poverty alleviation? That's not going to accelerate any quicker because we're in a crisis. And that's the unfortunate reality. Unfortunate, it is just a reality. Our cultural beliefs, our visceral, emotional, intuitive beliefs are really embedded in us. And so I think it's having to be in that space, be in the slow lane on the 401, get things going, maybe add some speed bumps in the left lane if you can, you know, get some speed bumps in there, slow things down there as you're trying to get people together, gather. The one thing I always find very interesting is when people come to me and say, we got to change them. If I come to you and just literally tell you, Ted, I don't like your background, change it right now. Mm-hmm. What are you going to do, man? You're going to look at me and say,
I'm going to pretend I'm a prince from somewhere and try and sell you something.
There you go. You're going to push back. You're going to push back. And so,
Right.
so I think that's also the piece that if you're working in the paradigm and systems level, we can't change other people. We have to change with, we have to invite in, we have to figure out where we're going together. But yeah, proselytizing change is very, very, we're programmed as human beings to resist that.
Right. I have a couple more questions on the thing. We can take a few more if you want to put something in. Next, I have Barry Bruce on, going to cover the stuff from him and Frederick, who had to leave, on population. We can raise that. And then Art. And we, as I say, we have room for a little more after that. Barry, go for it.
Yeah. Well, an example, I guess, of a macro norm at the moment is our corn and soybean agricultural economy. So it's got a lot of adherents. You just have to drive a couple of kilometers outside of Ottawa and you see nothing else. So there's a lot of adherence, but it's not sustainable. Sorry about that.
Okay.
It'll stop in a minute.
Okay, we'll put up with you. Go for it.
How do we turn this around? And how do we, okay, there we go.
Okay.
How do we turn that around, or how do we start thinking about turning it around, at least in the short amount of time we seem to have left?
Well, I mean, relocalization is already a topic of conversation, especially because of COVID, right? You even have broad political discussion. They don't always call it that, but you know, some people call it protectionism, whatever. But I think COVID has brought in that situation where relocalization, especially food production, becomes not only, it doesn't become a very politically ideological, dangerous space as it was before COVID. And I think that's a first kind of step into a different direction, where if you're looking at food systems in general, our dependency on the globalization, you know, globalization can have some good benefits, but when it came to food, it was probably a huge failure. 30% of food systems are wasted. We rely on things that don't exist in our own backyard, and when they fail us somewhere, we're all screwed. So whether it's looking at monocultural agriculture, which is basically agriculture for, you know, commoditization and money, the purpose is gone, right? You're not there to feed people, you're there to make money. As you start to have the conversations around what does it take to have communities thrive, localities thrive, a country is thriving, the idea of global, large, long-distance supply chains of I'm selling my soya beans to this group so they can package it into something else and sell it back to me simply becomes absurd. And I think the more we can show the absurdity, and when people say, yeah, but if you do that, Yannick, things will become more expensive. Yeah, and then you're getting into a whole topic conversation about money itself, right? I mean, I don't know if you all heard this morning, Alberta is shutting down a Bitcoin mining farm in some community because people, you know, found out about it and it was noisy. But the big part there is Bitcoin has no value, has no connections to society. Somebody burns fossil fuels to mine it in a computer and gets rich. And that's kind of what a lot of our currencies are about. They're disconnected from ourselves and our purpose, and they don't have meaning anymore. And most visibly in the food sector, right? So when I worked in sustainable fisheries, for example, we had a 3-year program with Prince Charles, and complete failure. I mean, obviously we didn't achieve anything on sustainable fisheries. But what's interesting is this: when the prince would ask the question of a fisheries company, "What's your purpose? Why do you exist?" "Oh, we're there to feed people." Well, no, you make money whether or not people eat the fish. Your only responsibility is to bring fish to market, not if they eat it. That's the entire agro-industrial food system. It is not there to feed people as a core purpose. So I think those are very complex issues. They're not simple. I'm not suggesting they're simple, but food can be one of the gateway transformative pieces, because food touches not just nutrition and you need food to eat, but it's cultural, has massive cultural significance. Is societal, right? Social cohesion around food. So I think it's almost one of those really transformative pieces that if you can start innovating, relocalizing, transforming the food system from local to global, that would have massive repercussions in the macroeconomic context. I mean, when you think about it,
from
most
global to local.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's what we're trying to do locally here, is to, I've never heard the term relocalization, but we are trying to create a self-sufficient local food economy here, realizing that maybe the principles themselves could spread from locality to locality, but it's consumers that drive the corn soybean system, because they keep pulling the products off the end of the food system production line. And so we think that maybe a ground up approach is going to be much more successful than the governmental one.
It's always going to be a tension between global and local. I mean, even if we do try to localize it, we're going to be stimulating mass migrations from the places that are overpopulating to underpopulating. Major changes that we're all going to have to cope with at some point. One of our contributors has raised a couple of questions. He can't go on because he's in an office environment. So I just thought I'd raise this. The notion is, can we in fact foster these kinds of rapid regional changes in population as well as global through any real relocalization process? And also, is it going to be feasible to do it without violence?
Yeah, and again, you know, if you had asked that question 30, 40 years ago, we probably had we had windows of opportunity to evolve out of a certain stuck system. Now we're getting closer and closer to these tipping points. And we've chosen, as a society, to not evolve and rather go through a very difficult time. I mean, I think as a geologist, I'm always take solace in the fact that planet Earth will be there for a lot longer than us. So I don't see it in necessarily planetary scale. I think, planet's there. But our human elements, the allowance that we do for human suffering in the name of money is incredible. Like that level of greed. We're seeing Afghanistan right now. If Afghanistan had oil, it would probably be very well protected, but it's not. And those are, again, if you look at where a lot of these root causes are, they're really still about that accumulation, right? That accumulation idea, that extraction idea, that class system idea. And so, if you're asking today, how are we going to start step one? I just say start step one. I mean, just take a step, go in a direction, believe in it. A lot of the work we do with youth, they ask the same big question. It's like, look, what is your passion? What calls to you? And just do it, and don't burn yourself out. Just follow your passion, because if everybody did that in a very systems way, that's when you start to get unpredictable tipping points. That's when you start to get politicians take awareness. That's when you might start to get leaders going, something's wrong, and we have to be part of the solution. So, I don't think you're going to get a bunch of, a lot of people say, oh, the UN can do this. And it's like, well, let's remind ourselves why the UN was created, right? It was created to maintain status quo, not to change the world.
Two more questions for you coming. One from Mike Mickerson and then one from Art Hunter, which should maybe help wrap this thing up. I'll go to Mike first, please. Illogically, it seems to come ahead of the one from you, Art.
Okay, well, I'm presuming this is the idea of liking what's plentiful as much as things that are scarce. There was a girlfriend that was working in Thailand, 500 kilometers from the next Caucasian person, who noticed that all of the exotic tropical fruit was really inexpensive in the market there, but that the fruit that brought the high price was the apple, because everybody wanted apples because they don't grow in the tropics, right? And if we could take satisfaction and focus our attention on things that are abundant, then we would be a whole lot easier to manage the planet in a sustainable way.
Yeah. No, I mean, the entire current model is based on producing fake scarcity, right? And then you put a value on it. This is also why I'm part of the 1%. I'm part of the 1% who gets to imagine as a job. 99% of the people on this planet don't get to imagine or be creative. Wow, right? We've added scarcity, fake scarcity, in order to reward a very small part of the imagination, the collective imagination. So the Apple story is fantastic. I mean, I remember my grandfather saying, "Oh, you kids today, you complain." When I was, getting an orange for Christmas, I was celebrating, and I couldn't understand until I realized in the early 1900s, or late 1800s, you didn't get an orange in the wintertime in Canada for Christmas. And so the idea of how exotic and how appreciative you were of getting that gift, now I can get a pineapple in December. So I think you're absolutely right. We've engineered the system that we have today is dependent on creating false scarcity, which is, again, simply a myth.
That can also extend to appreciating the transition of the seasons and watching them go by patiently, seeing day by day and the ebbs and flows. And there's all manner of absolutely amazing things going on around us all the time, that if we would focus in on what's real around us rather than the exotic, then there's great satisfaction to be had with very little disruption.
And slowing down. This is more recent, I think, than even you remember when in the 50s, we used to go down to the wharf in Vancouver and wait for the first boatload of Japanese oranges to come in before Christmas. And up to that point, you were simply eating somewhat aged produce and fish. So things did change.
Yep.
Anyway, Art, you want to ask the last question, and then we'll ask Jean to thank Yannick for us, and then we'll open it to a wide open discussion for everybody.
Okay. I guess, Yannick, I appreciated your presentation portion where you said, just a handful of people got together and made big economic changes after World War I, after World War II. We needed a crisis of some major standing for anything to happen rapidly. And here we are in a world where there is no crisis that is, at least as I like to say, increasing the body count to enormous proportions. So in fact, I would like to, propose that that's what we need. We need a massive crisis. We need a population correction. And here Mother Nature is coming along, threatening to do exactly that. So we as a population then say, well, should we just let Mother Nature proceed by us doing nothing and let this catastrophe happen? Hopefully some of us will survive, and then we can build a new economic order. I think, at least from where I sit, I see politicians around the world not willing to do anything. Just let it happen. I look forward to COP26 to see if anything of value comes out of that, or is it just a little bit of window dressing and dancing around the edges and maybe doing something about the economic order. But the billionaires will continue to rape the planet, and the poor will continue to get poorer until such time as Mother Nature does her population correction. Your comments on that?
I don't know where to comment on that. I mean, again, I'm not sure what you're asking. We set up a process where we pick and choose who lives and who dies. That's probably definitely not something that I would get into. The easiest way in the current system is to do a massive wealth transfer from the global north to the global south, and then you would see a stabilization of population. We're not going to probably do that because no one has the willingness to forego their particular individual wealth. So again, I don't think I think it's a non-starter to go down that path. I mean, we Canadians represent the most material intense population on the planet, right? Australia, Canada, US. So if we followed Elon Musk to Mars, we'd probably do a pretty good job of saving this planet, us Canadians, Americans, and Australians. So again, I don't know quite what would be a process that you would suggest if you were going to go down that particular pathway.
Well, I think it's a problem associated with neoliberal economics today that says, you know, that I don't know the exact numbers, but I've heard things like 10% of the population control 80% of the wealth. And of course, Canada, everyone on this conference is part of the 10%. And so we have a biased view of what's going on. It means that we have to sacrifice.
Art, if you want to be, I think we're all being very pessimistic right now, but just remember there already is a sorting stick going on. We just happens to be the system we're now playing with. And some of us believe that maybe there could be another means of choosing. That if not, we go back to first class on the Titanic and try to have a good time until it hits.
The other thing on population is that wherever basic, food security, shelter, education, healthcare are available to a population, that population tends to stabilize and start to go down. So if we were to take that on seriously as a population, as a civilization, then we would not exploit poorer countries, but encourage them to develop the ability to deliver food and shelter and education and healthcare. And they also would stabilize and start to come down. That's the best solution that I've heard. To
well, the education of women in particular.
Education of women, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
That is what's going to stabilize the population. And until people realize that, it has nothing to do with food, it has to do with the educating of the women so they can have a smaller, so that they're not abused anymore into being pregnant all the time. And second of all, so that they have the size of family that they can control and give health and education to.
Okay, on that, you just had the last word from outside, Sunitra, until we open it up again. Yannick, one last word before Jean says thank you.
Well, that's word from me.
Yeah, well, you're the
our attraction
presentation. Tell us what our walkaway line should be.
In the words of former President Obama, yes, we can, and we all can, using our new acronym for our hub. And again, I think the last word I would just say is in this space of rethinking paradigms and purpose for a system like the economy, it is going to be slow and steady, and it is about unleashing imagination, maximum imagination potential, and it's not going to be people who look like me that will be able to break through those new imagination spaces. It will really be a diversity of voices. So that's what I encourage, and that's what we're going to encourage as a foundation and as a partnership, is to really create those new canvases and invite everybody to paint together. And in 3 weeks, I'm sure we would come up with way better than Bretton Woods.
More fun, less stuff.
There you go. So over to you, Jean. Your turn.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much. That was a very, very intriguing presentation that you made, and it brings to mind the old, it's now becoming cliche, the things the thinking that got us into this mess isn't going to get us out of it. And we really do have to really buckle down and do something different. And it's wonderful to know that the David Suzuki Foundation and others are working together to try and come up with some other things that'll make lives easier and better, not easier, but better in the future. And as I said, just an absolutely fabulous talk and very thought-provoking. And that's obvious from all the comments that have been made. So on behalf of the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome, I would like to thank you enormously for the work or the presentation that you gave us today. And for those of you who are interested in finding out more about the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome, please check out our CanadianCore.com website. If you're interested to become a member or seeing some of the things that we've got, we would really appreciate that. And as Yannick was saying, we too are a charity. So if you wish to donate to us, we would be very helpful. We would be very thankful for that as well. So please, thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.